As if my story wasn't already complicated enough, after everything bad happened, life had a couple more curveballs in store for me. Asperger's syndrome and bipolar disorder. Didn't see that coming, did you? I plan to cover bipolar disorder, specifically my variety of bipolar disorder, in another video at a later time. Nice teaser I made 6 months ago when I promised I was going to talk about my bipolar disorder. Well, I've just been diagnosed, and the truth is it's taken me this long just to process the experience. You know, there are a lot of misconceptions about bipolar disorder, but one thing's for certain. Given the choice, no one would choose to have it. And you thought I sounded fun before. Hello, friends. Welcome to Mr. Snayl's Wild Ride. As always, I am Mr. Snayl, and the wild ride is my life so far. As it turns out, the 20-year period that started around 1995 that I've been referring to as when everything bad happened, let's just say that I realized that using the past tense might have just been wishful thinking. I launched this channel on July 11th, 2013, right in the middle of one of the worst years of my entire life. One of the many things that happened that year was I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder is fairly complicated. There are several kinds. My wife has one kind. I have another kind. Margot Kidder, who acted in the first batch of Superman films that came out in the 1980s, she has another kind altogether. One of the things the three of us have in common is that we're all fairly well managed on our medication, although not everyone is, unfortunately. Now, obviously, I am not a professional. I'm only going to attempt to give a very rudimentary overview of bipolar disorder in Mr. Snayl's fairly accurate oversimplification explanation. Depression, which is fairly well known, is a unipolar disorder, whereas periods of hypomania and at least one major depressive episode used to be referred to as manic-depression, referring to both poles. Bipolar disorder. Now, keep in mind that these are not just mood swings. They're much more severe and they last for an extended period of time, typically. Common misconceptions, of course, are that the mania aspect is just an extreme form of happiness, and this could not be further from the truth. Although hypomania can be characterized as an elevated mood, some of the characteristics of hypomania are things like increased activity over a period of several days, person can be more talkative, racing thoughts, increased risky behavior, whether it's sexual or buying sprees or drug use, but none of these behaviors are the result of drug use. Now, some of the symptoms of a major depressive episode involve things like diminished or loss of pleasure altogether in all or nearly all activities for most of the day over a period of several days, change in weight, change in appetite, change in sleep patterns, loss of energy, and again, these things are not drug use related. With the major depressive episode, this has to be some kind of impairment in life or work or social function. It's not just the person is glum for a long time. I was diagnosed with cyclothymia, rapid cycling mixed. The rapid cycling refers to going from hypomania to depression and back up again about twice a day, give or take. The mixed part means that I could be in both states at the same time. That's not fun. And less so for my wife, who was basically supervising me 24/7 for quite a few months. So that was this past summer. Previously, I had been diagnosed with chronic depression, and that was about 20 years ago. Now remember, my Asperger's syndrome wasn't diagnosed until I was 39. That was only 5 years ago. So why did it take so long for this diagnosis? Was it a change? Or was I misdiagnosed initially? I don't know. It's important to keep in mind that autism spectrum disorders are frequently comorbid with other conditions. Very common for people on the spectrum to have simultaneous conditions. In other words, attention deficit disorder or obsessive compulsive disorder or depression or anxiety and so on. All of these symptoms are presenting themselves at the same time, and the doctor can't separate them. He can't just turn one set of symptoms for one condition off and then analyze the other ones and diagnose the person. They're going on at the same time, and as fate would have it, many of the presenting problems have a lot of the same symptoms. Over the course of my whole life, I've always felt separate, different, outside of most everyone else. When I think back to my preteen and early teen years, I was especially unhappy most of the time. Did I feel separate because I was different? Or did I feel different because I was separate? I don't know. And I realize in hindsight now that I have had a long history of sort of a darker perspective and apparently explosive fits of anger, which is kind of embarrassing. I've eventually learned how to put on a public face just from studying other people's behavior. And when I finally got around to seeing therapists about my anger issues or my depression, I wound up wearing the public face there as well. And still do. I can't really help it. And so when I'm relating my problems, I have this very sort of matter-of-fact, articulate presentation. My wife would always get angry that I was holding back information, and I would always counter that argument with, I told him everything. And only this month, in fact, did I come to understand that she was referring to the emotional component. And if I'm telling him all these horrors, and then my mother committed suicide, and my father had lung cancer and died within 10 months of that, and I'm saying it all like that, very matter-of-factly, what is the therapist supposed to think? My wife and I have come to the conclusion that most of the time, my mania manifests as agitation, and only very occasionally as excitement or optimism. We still don't know what brought on this very recent sort of acceleration or exacerbation of my symptoms to the point where I would go from very happy to sobbing over the course of a day. So as I've said before, once you've figured out the problem, you can typically do something about it. I started on a new medication. Unfortunately, I saw very little relief. A couple more months after that I pushed for in a series of tests, I learned that I also had complex left temporal lobe epilepsy, mild but significant. Now, I'll cover that in a future episode, but hopefully it will be in fewer than 6 months. So that's it for this week. Please like this video if you found it interesting or helpful in any way, and subscribe for new episodes every Thursday if you haven't already. See you next time. Thanks. The period of time that I've been referring to as when everything bad happened, which was a period of time, period. The period that I've been referring to repeatedly as everything bad happened, kind that I have is similar to actor and authors, so used to saying Stephen Pressfield. That's not true. That we're fairly well managed on our medication, although not all one, tend to have an elevated or, this is hard, of bipolar disorder. So depression, which is fairly well known, is a uniform form of is a unipolar form of depression, or autism spectrum disorders are frequently Now, after a couple of months, we got up to So after being determined that I was bipolar, after being determined to be bipolar,